Right on time. All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. I declare that we do have quorum, everyone's here, and I'm going to ask Councillor Fitzgerald to read the land acknowledgement statement.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe under the terms of the Robinson-Huron Treaty number 61 of 1850 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. We commit to acknowledge, learn, educate, create opportunity, honor sacred places, and take actions towards real truth and reconciliation in support of our commitment to walking the path together in respect, peace, and harmony for future generations.
Thanks very much. I have a motion moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Deputy Mayor Armour. Be it resolved that the Planning Council agenda dated March 15, 2023 be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. All in favor? And that's carried. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? All right, seeing none. I would like to welcome everyone to the public portion of the meeting to consider applications to amend zoning bylaw 2008-66P and the community planning permit bylaw 2022-97 pursuant to section 34 of the Planning Act. The procedure of the public meeting will be as follows. A brief explanation of the purpose and effect of the application and any correspondence received to date will be given by staff. The applicant or the representative will be asked to provide any additional comments without repeating the information already outlined by staff. Any members of the public present, in person or electronically, will then be permitted to ask questions or provide comments respecting the applications. Council will then have the opportunity to question the applicant, the planner, or anyone giving presentations. Once the public meeting is concluded, the input received and proposed amendments will be considered by council. Any persons making representation are requested to first state their name and mailing address. And please note that presentations are limited to 10 minutes. Please be informed that an appellant must provide an oral submission at the public meeting or written submission prior to the passage of the zoning or CPP bylaw amendment. Otherwise, the Ontario Land Tribunal may dismiss the appeal. If you wish to be notified of the passage of a bylaw, you must file, either with the recording secretary or with the clerk, a written request for notification prior to the passage of the proposed bylaw. Each notice of complete application and public meeting included in explanation of the purpose and effect of the proposed amendment, and notice was required to be posted at the subject lands. Notice was therefore considered to have been provided in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and applicable sections of the Huntsville Official Plan. And with that, Madeline is going to speak to the first application on Ski Club Road.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, the subject property is located at 19 Ski Club Road. The lot is designated recreational resort residential within the Hidden Valley Special Policy Area under Huntsville's official plan and is zoned residential 1 in Huntsville zoning bylaw. Under the community planning permit bylaw, the lot is classified within the recreational resort residential precinct with a natural constraints overlay. An application was submitted to permit an addition to the existing dwelling and to recognize an existing dryland boathouse on the lot. The zoning bylaw amendment would change the zoning on the property from a residential 1 zone to a residential 1 holding with exception X zone to facilitate the proposal. The purpose of the exception would be to reduce the minimum required rear yard setback from 10 meters to 4.6 meters for a dwelling addition, reduce the minimum required front yard setback from 30 meters to 19.6 meters for a dwelling addition, reduce the minimum required front yard setback from 30 meters to 15.8 meters for an unenclosed deck attached to the dwelling addition, increase the maximum permitted building height from 9 meters to 9.9 meters for a dwelling addition and recognize the location of an existing non-complying dryland boathouse. Staff are recommending that a holding provision be added to the lands to require an entrance permit being granted by the town for an additional entrance off of Ski Club Road, a tree preservation plan prepared by a qualified professional to the satisfaction of the town to identify vegetation retention and protection measures to be implemented before, during, and after construction, a drainage plan with slope stability measures prepared by a professional engineer being submitted, and a site mitigation plan to include material storage prepared by a qualified professional being submitted, all to be reviewed through a community planning permit. As mentioned, the subject lands are zoned residential 1 in the Town of Huntsville zoning bylaw. The R1 zone permits single detached dwellings as of right. The proposed dwelling addition will also contain a secondary residential dwelling unit, which is a permitted use in the R1 zone. The Town of Huntsville zoning bylaw is no longer in force. However, since the application was submitted prior to the community planning permit bylaw coming into force and effect, it can be disposed of under the provisions of the former bylaw, under the provisions in the CPP. The proposed reliefs for the setbacks, height, and non-complying dryland boathouse are needed due to the lot's constrained area and steepness. To accommodate the proposed addition with a garage that is at grade to Ski Club Road, the development is closer to the rear yard and includes an increase in height. However, the proposal will not worsen the legal non-complying front yard setback of the existing dwelling. To ensure visual impacts to the addition are mitigated, a tree preservation plan has been requested to ensure mature vegetation between the proposed addition and shoreline are carefully maintained. When reviewing the policies respecting shoreline structures and shoreline buffers, the shoreline buffers shall be maintained across a minimum of 75% of the width of a lot and shall have a minimum depth of 15 meters measured from the shoreline. The applicants propose to revegetate a portion of the beached area and will be required to relocate or remove a smaller steel pipe dock to bring the shoreline amenity area into compliance. The amenity area is proposed to be 8.9 meters wide, and the applicants will be reducing the current size of the amenity area to be compliant with that 8.9 meter width. The CPP bylaw applies in relation to this application, and any site-specific amendments shall be incorporated into the CPP bylaw. The subject lands are contained within the recreational resort residential precinct in the CPP bylaw, and in addition to the recreational resort residential precinct, the lands are also within a natural constraint 2 overlay. Had the applicant submitted their application under the CPP, an amendment to the CPP would be needed to authorize the proposed development. Having regard to the provisions of the CPP bylaws, staff would recommend approval of the proposed amendment in that instance. And I just want to point out on the slide, on the right side shows the existing site, and on the left side shows 2 renderings of the property with the proposed addition, and both viewpoints are from Peninsula Lake. So looking at the official plan, the subject lands are located in an area designated recreational resort residential and are within the Hidden Valley Special Policy Area. According to the official plan, Huntsville's Hidden Valley Recreational Lifestyle and Resort Area has been historically developed as a recreational area. The character of this area is to be protected by ensuring views and vistas are preserved, ensuring prominent heights of land remain in natural appearance, and that as much vegetation as possible will be maintained on skylines, ridge lines, or adjacent to the top of rock cliffs. In this instance, the proposal is consistent with the nature of development on adjacent residential lots and does not conflict with the nature of surrounding commercial uses. Generally, the height and massing of new development in this designation will ensure that the proposed building fits into the topography of the area and does not project above the tree line, that the building height, massing, and architectural features respect and fit into the context of the character in the immediate area, and that there is compatibility between new and existing development, which can be accomplished through transitions in height and density. In this instance, the applicants have demonstrated through visual renderings that the proposed increase in height will not project above the tree line, and that the proposed addition to the dwelling will transition in height and be compatible with surrounding development. Tree retention is being carefully considered through this application, and a requirement for a tree preservation plan has been included as part of a holding provision to ensure staff are satisfied with the amount of vegetation retention maintained on the lot. To achieve compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood character, the proposed development is planned to be sited on the lot behind a mix of deciduous and coniferous trees. By preserving this vegetative buffer, the natural character of the waterfront area will be maintained. The development will blend in with surrounding waterfront development, and visual interruptions of the ridgeline will be avoided. Natural constraint mapping has identified sloping of 20 to 40% grades across the entire property, sloping of greater than 40% in the center of the property, type 2 fish habitat along the shoreline, and Peninsula Lake as being both a cold water lake and an at-capacity lake trout lake. To address steep slopes on the property, a slope stability review was prepared by Duke Engineering. The review found that the site has an average slope of 33%. The review also included an evaluation of the existing building, noting that it is founded on bedrock in a manner that incorporates multiple levels fitting into the natural slope and employs extensive use of concrete retaining walls that exhibit no sign of slope instability. Further, it mentions that the sloped area on the property can support the development of the proposed renovation and addition. The recommendations included within the report are in line with the principles and mitigation measures contained within the official plan. On the matter of stormwater management and construction mitigation, a fish habitat assessment was provided and included recommendations for appropriate construction mitigation measures. However, due to the constraint lot size and steepness of the property, to ensure drainage and construction material storage does not negatively impact the site or surrounding properties, both a drainage plan and site mitigation plan have been included as part of the holding provision and are required prior to the issuance of a community planning permit. And again, I just want to point on the slide that the top images are showing floor plans for each of the levels in the proposed and existing structure. So starting on the left, the floor plan shows the attached garage, which will be at grade with Ski Club Road. In the middle is the main floor, and on the very bottom is the lowest level, so the bottom floor. And the bottom image just shows the proposed dwelling with the addition. And due to sloping on the lot, only the garage will be visible from Ski Club Road, and the rest of the dwelling will be below the grade of the road. And that'll be further shown in the images on the next slide. And there will be no habitable space on the lowest level of the addition, only a crawl space. So just wanting to point that out. So continuing with the discussion in relation to the official plan, the land-water interface in relation to shoreline development and protection was reviewed in relation to this proposal. In this instance, Peninsula Lake is identified as a cold water lake, which requires a 30-meter setback for development. The proposal will not meet the 30-meter setback. However, the existing setback is closer than 30 meters, and the proposed development would not be coming closer to the shoreline than what is existing. Peninsula Lake has been verified by the province of Ontario as being an at-capacity lake trout lake, unable to sustain further development. Development of existing vacant lots for residential uses will be permitted with a setback and vegetation retention of 30 meters. The policies go further to discuss requirements for independent sewage disposal and leaching beds. As the property is municipally serviced with water and sewer, effects to lake trout lake should be appropriately mitigated. In regards to vegetation retention, due to the size of the lot, the 30-meter setback and vegetation requirement is unachievable. In this instance, vegetation will be retained wherever possible and in all areas outside of the development, specifically within the 15-meter shoreline buffer. To address the lesser setback to the shoreline, a fish habitat assessment was prepared by Riverstone Environmental Solutions. The report states that the shoreline consists of type 2 fish habitat with a small area of type 1 fish habitat. The dwelling addition is located within the 30-meter front yard setback, and while the proposal will increase the amount of development within the setback, The potential impacts of the development are expected to be minimal, assuming appropriate mitigation measures are taken and the shoreline buffer is enhanced following construction. To mitigate construction-related impacts, Riverstone has recommended various measures in their analysis, which will be included as conditions within a community planning permit. And this slide just shows the view of the existing dwelling. And so on the right is from Peninsula Lake, and on the left is from Ski Club Road. So you can see that really only the chimney is currently visible from the road. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. The building department provided comments that requested a drainage plan and site mitigation plan being prepared by a qualified professional and submitted due to the constraint lot size. These plans are required prior to the issuance of a community planning permit should council view the application favorably. Comments also noted that no material or equipment shall occupy the roadway unless an occupation permit has been obtained through the Public Works Department. The fire department provided concerns respecting the possible risk of flooding during significant flooding events, and it was confirmed that the proposed addition is above the regulatory flood elevation for Peninsula Lake, which has satisfied their concern. District of Muskoka staff have provided no objection to the proposal, provided that appropriate development control techniques are used. And through staff's review and analysis, the application would appear to conform to the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement, and therefore staff are recommending approval. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks very much. I'll call on the applicant or representative to make any comments about the application. I see no one in person. Is there somebody online that would like to speak? I'm speaking about the applicant or the representative, obviously.
Chair Stone, I see one hand raised. I will now bring them into the meeting.
Wonderful, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tony Menicola, and this is my wife, Eva. Hello.
Just
First of
one
all,
second. We can't see you, we can hear you. Is there video?
My thing shows that I have a video present, but give me a second here.
Let me just ask staff, just hang on 1 second. Well, we can't seem to get your video up right now. Staff are working on that, but why don't you go ahead?
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank council for listening to our application. We've done extensive work in both design, engineering, reports, studies to ensure that what we want to do is going to conform to everyone's liking and to the requirements and bylaws for the town. We're hoping that you'll accept the application and approve it as noted.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. I'm going to ask members of the public who are present or electronically. You would need to raise your hands electronically, but would anyone like to speak to this application? I'm seeing no one in person. Do we have anyone online?
Chair Stone, I see no hands raised.
All right. Then committee members, any comments or questions about the application? Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Chair Stone. And through you to Madeline, more of a comment. It was a very, very extensive report, and thank you. I love the photographs. You always do great photographs for the proposals. I guess my comment is I'm so glad that the tree preservation plan will be going forward, because this is a fairly large addition to the existing home. And it's a little bit misleading when you see the drawings when the trees are added in. So I'm very happy to hear that there will be like a holding provision for the tree preservation. I guess my question is, once the building or once the home is finished, does staff go back and look at this or review the tree? Like, some of those were mature trees that were in the proposal. Are they leaving the trees there? But do we go back and take a look and see what they've done?
Madeline?
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So essentially, the tree preservation report would analyze what is going to be retained, what areas will be removed. There may be securities collected as part of that report. And if so, once the construction is completed, the applicants would obviously request those back. So staff would go do a site visit prior to releasing those.
Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and through you to Madeline, I guess. They're proposing to build a secondary suite, and is it the intention of using that secondary suite as a short-term rental, or are they planning to be there half the time, full-time? What is the situation with respect to that?
Sure, thank you. Through you, Chair Stone. I'm not entirely sure, and maybe we can ask the owners to clarify. Secondary suite is worked into I believe it's the main floor, or it's the lower level, but maybe we can ask the owners to confirm.
That would be great. Could we ask the applicants if they
All right.
are intending to use the
Is
second?
the applicant still online?
Yes.
We're here.
We're here.
We have no intention of renting the suite. We're using it as a guest suite for friends and family. We have kids and grandchildren, and we intend to use the property on weekends as a family place of gathering. We have no need for rental. We're financially stable. We don't need to collect rent money to substantiate the addition.
Okay.
And we're up there most of the summer, and hopefully
Hopefully
we
more.
retire up there.
Hopefully more. That's what I was saying,
Exactly.
right?
That's sort of the long-term plan.
Thanks very much for that.
Thank
You're
you. Councilor Cluche.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I don't have a problem with this. The only thing that I question is because there's a new driveway showing the addition of, like, basically with the garage, 5 vehicles in there, is there the need to keep the asphalt parking lot on the existing one? Because that's basically covering a lot of the front of the roadway. It's basically going to look like a parking lot with the cars in the new parking lot, in the new entranceway, and the existing one that's there now for the asphalt parking.
All right,
Just
I'll
wondering
ask Madeline.
what's the long-term plans for that?
Sure, thank you. Through you, Chair Stone. From what I understand, the owners intend to keep both entrances, so to ensure that it would be appropriate for a second entrance to be issued on Ski Club Road, we've included that in the holding. And if it's determined by our operations department that a second entrance isn't appropriate, it may be that asphalt parking lot has to be closed to accommodate for the new driveway.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Armour?
Thanks, Chair Stone. That was my question.
All right, thank you. Other comments or questions from committee, or council, actually? Seeing none. Moved by Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Clark. Be it resolved that Planning Council approves zoning bylaw amendment Z 35-2022 HTE, changing the zoning from a residential 1 zone to a residential 1 holding with exception. 2, reduce the minimum required rear yard setback from 10 meters to 4.6 meters for a 132 square meter dwelling addition. Reduce the minimum required front yard setback from 30 meters to 19.6 meters for a 132 square meter dwelling addition. Reduce the minimum required front yard setback from 30 meters to 15.8 meters for a 65 square meter unenclosed deck attached to the dwelling addition. Increase the maximum permitted building height from 9 meters to 9.9 meters for a 132 square meter dwelling addition, and recognize the location of the existing non-complying dryland boathouse. And further, that the holding provision may be removed and development may proceed upon the Director of Development Services being satisfied that the following has been completed. An entrance permit being granted by the town for an additional entrance off of Ski Club Road. A tree preservation plan prepared by a qualified professional identifying vegetation, retention, and protection measures to be implemented before, during, and after construction. A drainage plan with slope stability measures prepared by a professional engineer being submitted, and a site mitigation plan to include material storage prepared by a qualified professional being submitted, all to be reviewed and evaluated through the community planning permit. Any comments or questions? All in favor? And that's carried. All right, thanks, Madeline. Manager of Planning, Richard Clark, is going to speak to us about some housekeeping amendments to our CPP.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So through you, Mr. Chair, I have some slides to walk you through to describe housekeeping amendments to the community planning permit bylaw. Basically, this is a housekeeping amendment to our new community planning permit bylaw, and the purpose and effect is to improve implementation of that bylaw and also to bring provisions regarding additional residential units into alignment with recent provincial legislative changes. So the changes are minor and technical in nature, and as you can see on this slide, they are categorized as promoting streamlining, providing clarification, matching pre-existing permissions for certain precincts, addressing official plan conformity, and encouraging gentle density. So I can walk through these provisions. Just before I do, I should note that the draft bylaw that we placed on our website at the beginning of the public consultation process, we had tweaked some of the provisions slightly based on comments from the district and an effort to just clarify some of the language. So for those ones that have been changed, I'll just note that to you guys. So with respect to streamlining, we've included a new provision to permit technical revisions to the bylaw without requiring an amendment. We've also included 2 new exemptions. One would be for minor works, if they're deemed minor by the Director of Development Services. And a good example of that would be like a deck on an existing dwelling that's far removed from any trees or the shoreline or anything like that, and wouldn't really trigger any concerns, but would trigger a permit just because it might be on a shoreline or a waterfront residential property. And for those types of works, we felt it would be appropriate to have some sort of basically a waiving provision. And then the second is, and this is one where we talked to the district over the course of the public consultation period and did change the language a little bit. The second is for development where it's been approved in a development agreement as outlined in conditions of approval for a draft plan of subdivision or a condominium. And the idea there is just to eliminate the duplication that you might encounter if you've already done a development agreement with a developer, so not to have another permit process afterwards. There are a series of technical revisions to improve clarity, so I'm not sure I'll go through all of them. and they are very technical. Maybe if there's any questions on those, I can clarify, but very technical and minor revisions for clarity purposes. We're matching pre-existing permissions for a few of our provisions, so we're going to, whereas before for residential 3 or medium density residential zones, we used to allow up to 4 dwellings in a multiple residential dwelling. That permission was removed for our medium density residential in the CPP bylaw, so we're adding it back in because it didn't make sense to take that out. Another change that we noticed when we were reviewing our bylaws that we inadvertently took out permissions for tourist establishments in urban business employment precincts, so we're adding that back in. There was a minor change to one of our waterfront precincts, the Waterfront Residential 60 precinct, or the WR1, and it relates to the lot area requirement. The official plan stipulates that the minimum lot area for new waterfront properties is 1 hectare, whereas in this precinct we stated the lot area as existing, which is not accurate and would have had unintended consequences of requiring variations where we didn't want them. And then with respect to gentle density, so as you all know, Bill 23 introduced many changes to the Planning Act, and one of them related to allowing gentle density as of right in areas that are serviced. So the town already had pretty good provisions in our community planning permit bylaw to encourage gentle density. But one thing that it made or that it imposed is a requirement that we have only one unit permitted in the dwelling and 1 unit in an accessory. And we've changed it to allow up to 2 units on any property where a secondary residential dwelling unit is permitted, without requiring 1 to be in the dwelling and 1 to be in the accessory. So you could have what would appear to be like a triplex type of building as of right wherever secondary residential dwelling units are permitted. And I guess that's it for my presentation.
Yes,
Thank
that's
you very
it.
much, and I'll take any questions you may have.
Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and thank you, Richard, for the update. It was an incredible reading for me. I'm still learning about all this. I don't know how you guys keep it straight, but I guess my question would be, with the gentle density, it doesn't apply to the urban residential shoreline precinct, does it? So you couldn't have a triplex on a shoreline in our area, could we?
That's a very good question, through you, Mr. Chair. I don't have my bylaw with me, so I can't confirm. But if it's not permitted as an additional accessory use in that precinct, then it wouldn't be allowed. But wherever it is, so in the rural, in the urban, wherever it's permitted, this change would apply. So, does anyone want to clarify that if they have the bylaw with them? Oh, it is permitted? Okay, sorry. In our bylaw? Okay.
Sorry, Chair Stone, may I just to clarify, if it is serviced, if there's water and sewage to the property on a residential shoreline, then you are allowed to have a triplex.
I think if
Sorry to put you on the spot, Richard.
Thank you, good question. I'm going to just take a second just to pull up that information. I don't want to lead you astray.
Thank you.
Well, before we finish up with that, we'll let Richard continue, but I'm going to go to the members of the public that may have comments about these changes. Anyone present? Any? All right, please come down. Please state your name and address, and then start. All right, if you could put your microphone on and then begin. Perfect.
Hello. Okay. Mr. Chair, councillors, it's a joy to be here at this table. I'd just like to give unto all things, may we be thankful to God. Hallelujah. I do have a couple of points here that I would like to bring forward in regards to the housekeeping issues that is being dealt with here. I believe that every councillor that's on this committee and that has passed or is getting ready to pass the community planning permit has received any of the statements from participants as well as any applications, such as the one we just heard that was for previous under the zoning bylaw, but also the ones that are currently in agreement, at the OLT. So I just would like to read for the record, because I'm asking as part of this whole process that, and perhaps maybe whoever is the expert or experts in this, that they could say whether or not this provision is actually applied in the permit. There's several items that were submitted as participant status for the last OLT that we've been privy to be participant with. And I'd like to then ask this council in the housekeeping amendments, is this provision here? It would be under the exceptions that I saw, I think, in regards to the second point that the manager mentioned. And it under our letter, it was item 3. And what we are asking for is that an exception be allowed, and if that's where it should be placed, for anyone that has property, a formal exception to the CPP 2022-97 is required as an amendment that would apply broadly and act as an exception to development unless formally signed off by the parties, owners, in each case that would be neighborly. The exception is requested for approval at the municipal, district, and provincial levels, that provision be put in where applicable in the 500-page CPP. So not being an expert in that area, this is what is being requested as a housekeeping amendment to probably that second point under exceptions for development agreement, that be applied to any agreement that is entered into, that they would have the sign off from neighbors that any development, whether it's subdivision, condominium, that be signed off by neighbors that would be affected by that development.
I-
Thank you.
I don't believe that's the case. I'm going to ask Richard to speak to that, if he would.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So, if I understand correctly, and I'm not quite sure I do, but I think what we have before us is a housekeeping amendment to the community planning permit bylaw. And I know that there is a separate matter underway relating to the outstanding appeals for the community planning permit bylaw for the one property on South Portage Road. So I know that Ms. Inslee is a participant in relation to that particular matter. And I'm wondering if what she's asking for is isolated to just that property, or whether or not she's talking about something more. What I would say, if it's something more, if it's related to the South Portage Road matter, that's before the Ontario Land Tribunal. So I would say it should be left there. And if it's related to this housekeeping amendment, I would say that this new provision that we're proposing would only come into play if an application comes forward, a subdivision or a condominium application, and is approved by the approval authority, which is the district. And through that process, there would be a consultation process, and the public would be invited to provide comments. So I'm not sure of the appropriateness of what's being asked for in relation to those. So I guess maybe what I would ask is if Ms. Inslee could clarify if this just relates to South Portage Road, or if this is something broader. And I'm not sure if that would help or not, but at least we could find that out.
Okay, so I'll put that to you. Is it in regard to the South Portage Road?
Yes, I would like to say that it's a broad general, that it be applicable to not only the OLT that is gone through. There's been three. There's one still outstanding, I believe. But also as housekeeping, that also be considered as an amendment under that exception, that there would be no development unless there was sign off by neighbors. I'm not talking about public consultation. I'm talking about the neighboring properties, that any development would have sign off to their satisfaction for any development going in, either to a subdivision or a condominium subdivision when there's a large development. And the other item that I neglected to mention about, in that it doesn't apply to that second bullet under exceptions, it applies to some of the things that council can request when there's development, whether it's as in community permit, and there's in transition, there are some that they consider adding the provision that an integrated watershed management tool be used in assessing the wetlands. And I'm referencing in that case the Mr. Peter Sale, which you may be familiar with, who has put in an opinion, and I think it's an excellent tool that should be also considered when looking at the planning and when looking at large developments that deal with watershed, especially in light of the bill that that has gone through, and other provisions for changes to the Ontario Planning Act.
All right, thank you very
Okay.
much. So That's more than 10 minutes for the deputation, but before you leave, Mayor Alcock has something to add.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and through you to Ms. Inslee. I guess two things. One is you're looking for 100% approval or sign-off from surrounding neighbors on any given development.
To the satisfaction of the surrounding neighborhood, whether that be one, whether that be 5, depending on the adjacency of the development, yes.
So ostensibly 100%? What if it was, there were 5 neighbors, but 4 approved and 1 didn't?
I think that that could be a process that would be, that could be discussed, and maybe a public meeting could decide that, or council could debate that and allow for input from the public on regards to what would be the best scenario to go forward.
So if I may, just a quick follow-up. I just wanted to understand that because I look at that and I think the intention of the process is to have public consultation, and the hope is always that through public consultation that you have the majority of surrounding neighbors comfortable or at least understanding what that development is. And my view is that the role of committee or council in this case is to be that play the role that you're describing now. You're in some respects, I feel the process is a bit undermined by saying you have to get all of those neighbors signing their approval before it even gets to council. And from my view, I think kind of that's the role of council, the way I see it. And I wondered if you have a comment on that.
I appreciate that comment, and that's an excellent scenario to deal with this. But I'm also looking at other options that normally developers will come in and speculate through, their land purchase, and there's plans already in play over many years. It's not just done overnight. And in that process, I think that it would be reasonable to also ask that those stipulations be included by the developer. They're dealing with a lot of different studies, and this certainly could be included to favor their approval process, whether it's at level 1, 2, or 3, if that were done previous. And then that would certainly go very far to treat your neighbor with respect.
All right, thank you very much. With that, I
Thank
will
you.
go to any other members of the public that wish to make comment about these potential changes to the CPP. Electronically, you would need to raise your hand.
Chair Stone, I see no hands raised.
Thank you. So I'll go back to committee. Any comments or questions about what Richard has proposed here? Oh, did you have a comment? Yeah, right.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I do have an answer to Helena, or Councillor Rennick's earlier question, so I can just give you that. So for the waterfront urban residential shoreline precinct, we already permitted up to 3 dwelling units on a urban residential shoreline property. So yeah, this wouldn't change that. What it changes is it can have, it doesn't need to be 1 in the main building and 1 in the accessory. It can be up to 3 in the main building.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and through you to Richard. Does that still mean that you can't have 2 units in an accessory building? That's still not allowed?
I went to press the mic and I pressed the slides on accident. It was such a good question. So thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So there was never a permission that would allow 2 in the accessory structure. it was up to 1 max in the accessory structure, and we've kept that in.
Then just to follow up, so do we feel that's in compliance with Bill 23, or, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Renwick.
I have a new question, Chair Stone, thank you. So the report that came to council on February 15th, the DEV 2023-27, I apologize, we looked at it last time, and I think it was in order for us to look at the housekeeping efficiencies. One of the items in there talks about exemptions, and it does talk about permits not being required for vegetation removal, such as trees. So I think to go further back to the bylaw, it does state the exemptions, minor works meeting the provisions of the bylaw were deemed appropriate by the Director of Development Services or designate. So would minor works be considered tree removal? No? You're shaking your head.
No, thank you, good question. There are already exemptions for certain tree removals, so hazard trees, for example, it would be exempt. So minor works is essentially for buildings and structures that are deemed minor, and that we wouldn't want to issue a permit for. So that's the idea. And going back to the previous staff report, where we did talk about vegetation removal, we didn't give a scenario, but what the scenario would be is for a draft approved plan of subdivision, where there's a requirement for the proponent as a condition of approval to enter into a development agreement with the town of Huntsville. And we've already done that. We've already entered into that agreement, and it implements a tree removal requirement. Then we wouldn't do another permit. So that's the idea with this, this exemption.
So, thank you, Chair Stone. So that's just the draft approval. If the town of Huntsville approves the draft approval, then they don't have to come back again to get another approval for, within that context of tree removals. Okay. And I do understand what the minor works. You gave a very good example about the, adding a patio or a section onto a patio that's already there. Okay, but when I see tree removals, I just want to make sure that it is covered under, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and through you. Following up on Councillor Fitzgerald's comment, so currently, if somebody has a home, they can add a dwelling unit to that home, and then they can build a detached single dwelling unit to make 3 units on their property. But right now, if somebody came to you and they want to build 2 units in an accessory building, we would say no. Is there any appetite for us to change that, just knowing that we're trying to get more units into the rental pool as quick as possible? To me, if you're still allowing one building can have 2 units and one can have 1, or one can have 3. But it makes sense if somebody comes, they want to build a duplex on their property and it meets all the setbacks and zoning, I don't see why we wouldn't approve that. Maybe to give you guys ammunition to approve something like that.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and the purpose of this change is to provide as-of-right permissions. So if you had a property, it's within a certain precinct where secondary residential dwelling units are permitted, then as-of-right, you can do up to 2 units, but one has to be, a maximum of 1 in the accessory structure. So that's just as-of-right. If someone wanted to change those rules, in other words, vary those rules, then there's a process. And the process would be through a Class 2 variation, and then that's a staff approval. Obviously, through that process, the public is notified, and there's a 14-day commenting window, but that would be the process for someone to do that. It's not as of right.
Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Chair Stone. Just to follow up on that. So what would, if you're referring to as of right, But if we're only looking at a numbers question, which is what Councillor Morrison was doing, if the proponent wanted to put 2 units in the accessory building and 1 in the permanent building, then why couldn't that be as of right as well? You're not changing the numbers, it's just 2 happen to be in the accessory. And I think, is that where Councillor Morrison was going with that? Or it is intriguing that I'm not sure I understand the rationale as to why one is permitted and the other one isn't, when the number is the same.
So I think it's, I think the normal situation on a normal property is the principal building is usually the dominant structure. And it's usually got the parking associated with it, the garage associated with it. And the accessory building is usually a smaller building. And neighbors wouldn't be used to it being used as a duplex, basically. So giving permission as of right for all of those garages to then house 2 residential dwelling units is a big change. So what doing it this way requires is that there's an application process, the neighbors are notified, we look at the property under the criteria that's in the community planning permit bylaw, and we think about things like potential impacts and how to mitigate them. So that's why I think it's more appropriate this way. And if anyone else has anything else to offer, but that would be what I would say.
Follow up?
I promised last time,
Yeah.
Councillor Stone. So if we, thank you for that, if we developed criteria that the applicant would have to meet, and I hear you as to what the permanent dwelling would have, maybe larger space for parking or whatever. But if the accessory building had all of that and met all of the criteria, then again, I'll go back to it. It would strike me that it could be drafted in such a way that if all of these conditions are met, that we could be more flexible. But I'm only one.
All right. Did you have anything? Director Maxwell wants to speak.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I just wanted to add something to that Richard had mentioned, is that we're not saying no. And I don't think necessarily we would say no if there were any site-specific applications that came forward. It just provides us with a little bit more opportunity to consider the site-specific circumstances behind why it's more appropriate to have 2 units not in the dwelling and 1 in the house. I mean, in the urban area, it's really difficult with a lot of our older lots to determine how you could fit an accessory building that would be large enough to house 2 units in it and still maintain appropriate setbacks from the neighbors. So it just gives us that ability to make sure that it's being done properly, I think, in consideration of neighbors. So.
Fair enough.
All right.
Thank you for that.
No other comments or questions? All right. Moved by Councillor Renwick, seconded by Councillor Cloutier. Be it resolved that Planning Council approve Community Planning Permit Bylaw Amendment, CPPA 01-2023 HTE, amending Community Planning Permit Bylaw 2022-97 to improve implementation and permit additional residential units where appropriate to align with recent provincial legislative changes. Comments or questions? All in favor? And that's carried. All right. Now that all comments have been received, I declare these public meetings respecting the above applications to be concluded. We will now move to the non-public portion of the meeting. And Kelsey is here. She's going to speak to the Curling Club.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 6 Veterans Way, as you can see in front of you. Oops. The property is within the urban residential designation in the official plan and is within the institutional precinct in the CPP bylaw. The application has been submitted to permit the construction of an ice technician shed and entrance canopy addition to an existing institutional building, the Curling Club. A Class 3 CPP is required to reduce the exterior side yard setback from 7 meters to 4.5 meters for the entrance canopy. Well, we'll see what turns out. Reduce the rear yard setback from 7 meters to 4.8 meters for the entrance canopy, as you can see here. Increase the lot coverage from 45% to 54.5%. Recognize the existing parking of 18 spots, inclusive of 2 accessible parking spots, and recognize the existing landscape buffers. So here are the 2 additions. This one hatched is the ice technician shed, and that's harder to see, but the other circle is the entrance canopy. Looking at the 5 criteria in the CPP variations, the proposed development represents an appropriate redevelopment that will support the continued viability of a long-standing permitted institutional use. The relief for the ice technician shed and entrance canopy addition is needed as the existing building location is considered legal non-complying. The lot coverage increase is 54.5%, though the proposed with the pros for additions, the existing lot coverage is 53.1%, so it's considered a minor deviation. Options for the placement of the entrance canopy additions are also limited due to the current placement of the building. In this instance, it would not impact abutting residential uses. The parking and landscape buffers are considered legal non-complying and are not required to be brought into conformity with the standards of the CPP bylaw. However, staff are recommending that additional plantings be provided to enhance the streetscape along Center Street and Veterans Way. Parking is also being removed from the right-of-way, and additional parking is provided off-site on the eastern lot. So here's where the proposed entrance canopy addition is and where the ice technician shed is. The additions proposed are anticipated to minimally affect the current external functions of the site. Recognizing the existing parking and removing available parking from the right-of-way are also not expected to change the off-site parking situation, as there's an eastern Town of Huntsville lot with memorandum and daytime on-street parking. Staff were originally told the site was to be regraded, so operations and building had requested a stormwater management report to ensure that redevelopment does not adversely impact abutting lands. However, staff have now been informed that this regrading is minor, so this condition may be removed through a resolution. Lastly, the official plan permits institutional uses in all designations. For these uses, adjacent buffers between the institutional uses and residential uses should be provided, separating and adequately buffering with planting, screening, depending on the nature and intensity of the use. In this instance, there is minimal and no existing buffers between residential uses to the rear. The building is also significantly lower than the traveled road, and the additions are not seen to further encroach into these areas. In view of the foregoing, the conditions with the noted conditions, the application would appear to conform with the intent of the CPP bylaw and be consistent with the PPS. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, and the district had no objection to the proposal. Through staff's review and analysis, the application would appear to conform with this intent of the official plan and be consistent with the PPS, and therefore staff are recommending provisional approval. Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. I will ask the applicant or representative if they would like to make any comments. Welcome. Oh. Once again. Yeah, it was on. There you go.
Oh, there's the light. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just Duncan Ross at 36 Chaffee, Suite 201, Huntsville, Ontario. Agree with everything that's been said so far. Just here to answer any questions.
Perfect. I love that. All right, committee members, any comments or questions? Councillor Cloutier.
Through you, Chair, Councillor Stone. The last time we were here, we talked about the stairs into the parking lot. For that, has any changes been thought about that from, because they were stone and we felt that more metal industrial would have been better?
I don't know if that's a separate issue.
Is it?
Totally separate issue.
It is
so-
total separate? Okay, I
Yeah.
just didn't know whether it was on this or not. Okay.
Thanks. Deputy Mayor Armour.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Stone. I'm just glad to see this happening. This is a great location for curling club, and we've invested in this for a long time. So it's nice to see some additions coming on, making it a better place for the community. Just wanted to clarify, the part about the grading, you said you need a resolution for that, have that removed?
Yes, through you, Chair Stone. Yes, it was originally noted that the regrading would maybe be more substantial, but the applicant has noted that it's just some raking happening, and I talked to building and operations, and they said that that could probably be removed, so I've added a resolution, should anybody want to pass that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd put that resolution forward.
Okay. Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Chair Stone. Thank you for the report, and I think I concur with Councillor Armour about the fact that this is going forward. A total aside here, but when I look at the outside of that building, I always want to see murals on the outside or something with. Couldn't you see like on either side a mural of someone, actually doing curling? I'll just put that out there that I think that's what should happen. So.
Thank you. All right, do we have a resolution on this? We don't have a resolution, do we?
For the curling club, we do, yeah.
Director Maxwell.
Sorry, thank you, Chair Stone. I was going to say, I was just going to add that the resolution can stand as it is because it talks about the stormwater management plan being to the satisfaction of staff, but if the staff requesting it have said they no longer need it, then we would just not require it to be provided. But if council was comfortable and preferred to remove it, we could do that as well. It's
All right.
Chair Stone, do you have the resolution already done up, the change? Okay, then I'm good with it as long as staff's fine.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? All right. Moved by Councillor Schumacher, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Be it resolved that Planning Council provisionally approved Community Planning Permit Application CPP 09-2023 HTE. Purpose and effect of which is to provide relief from subsections 2.12.4C, 3.2.2V, and 4.7.4 of the of the Community Planning Permit Bylaw to 2022-97. A Class 3 Council variation. 2, reduce the interior side yard setback from 7 meters to 4.5 meters for the entrance canopy. Reduce the rear yard setback from 7 meters to 4.8 meters for the entrance canopy. Increase the primary lot coverage from 45% to 54.5%. Recognize the existing 18 parking spaces inclusive of 2 accessible parking spaces and recognize the existing landscape buffers. All to permit the construction of an ice technician shed and entrance canopy addition. Conditional on a final site plan drawing being prepared to illustrate the layout of the proposed development on the lands in accordance with the relevant standards of the CPP bylaw, except as varied through this application with the following clearly illustrated. A, remove parking from the Town of Huntsville road allowance. And B, additional plantings being installed along Center Street and Veterans Way sides of the property. A stormwater management report being provided to the satisfaction of the Town of Huntsville. Conditions 1 and 2 being fulfilled within 1 year of the date on which the provisional approval is granted. And a final community planning permit being issued by the town with conditions in place to require implementation of requirements arising from fulfillment of conditions 1 and 2, where appropriate, and implementation of recommendations contained within requested stormwater management report. Comments or questions? All in favor? And that's carried. All right. Thanks, Duncan. All right, Kelsey, our last application on Canal Road.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 781 Canal Road. The property is within the waterfront designation and within the waterfront residential 120-meter precinct. The application has been submitted to permit the construction of a boathouse. A Class 3 community planning permit approval is required for the following: to reduce the setback to type 1 fish habitat from 30 meters to 0 meters for the boathouse, increase the proposed boathouse and dock projection from 15 to 23.9 meters, recognize the 23.4 meter projection of the existing dock, recognize the 0.8 meter setback from the stream for the dryland boathouse, recognize the 1.7 setback to type 1 fish habitat for the dryland boathouse, to permit 2 2-meter pedestrian paths within the shoreline buffer, and increase the cumulative width of the shoreline amenity area from 15 meters to 46.84 meters. So I think I've illustrated some of these. So here's the proposed boathouse. Here's the proposed projection of that boathouse and dock. Here's the existing dock and its projection. Here is the amenity width, though it doesn't include that path, it includes the width shown and then the width of the boathouse. Here is the dryland boathouse. And here is the boathouse that has already been removed. I found that was a bit confusing on the site plan, so just so we're clear that it's just the one boathouse. Looking at the 5 criteria to analyze CPP variations, a boathouse previously existed on the east side of the property, which has been removed. The existing development within the shoreline amenity area includes a dock with a projection of 23.2 meters, or 23.4 meters, a non-complying dryland boathouse, patio area, and landscaping. The existing cumulative width of the amenity area is 34.57 and would need to increase to accommodate the width of the new proposed boathouse. A fish habitat assessment was provided for the application as the shoreline abutting the property is identified as type 1 fish habitat. The fish habitat assessment identified that the proposed boathouse location would be within type 2 fish habitat and would be considered appropriate provided revegetation and mitigation measures recommended within the report are implemented. The previous boathouse was identified in type 1 fish habitat, therefore moving it into type 2 habitat would be considered an improvement. The proposed boathouse would develop in an area of shoreline separate from the existing dock and associated landscaped area, therefore increasing the amenity area width. It should also, it would also project further into the lake than the previous boathouse. Relief is also needed to increase the dock and boathouse projection from 15 meters to 23.9 meters and recognize the existing projection of the dock. Within the CPP bylaw, when the 15-meter projection of the dock ends at a depth of less than 0.75 meters of the normal or controlled high water mark, the dock may extend until the depth reaches 0.75 meters at the end of the dock. So the maximum projection is 30 meters. The site plan does identify 0.084 meters, and I think that's 2.75 feet, beyond which the dock and the boathouse and second dock project. Justification has not been provided for this additional projection beyond 0.75 meter depth, which is prescribed in the bylaw, nor has the 0.75 depth been shown on the site plan, despite projecting further into the lake than the previous boathouse. The location is outside type 1 fish habitat and is on a more concave portion of the shoreline. So here's roughly where the boathouse will be. And this is the dryland boathouse. The proposal increases the cumulative width of the amenity area and includes an additional 2-meter pedestrian path within the shoreline. The existing dryland boathouse contributes to the increased cumulative width. There has been no confirmation of the building being legal, non-complying, or conforming, and it is not shown on aerial imagery prior to 2018. Staff requested that the fish habitat assessment author review the location of the dryland boathouse. to confirm that it's appropriately located or it's to be removed, and that hasn't been provided. As noted in a previous presentation, Penn Lake is an at-capacity lake trout lake, which requires a 30-meter shoreline buffer. The applicant has agreed to revegetate the shoreline to comply with this 30-meter shoreline buffer requirement. The shoreline buffer has been provided on the site plan. However, a detailed revegetation plan has not been provided. A condition could be imposed to require a revegetation plan should council view the application favorably. It would appear more appropriate to locate the new proposed boathouse within the existing shoreline amenity area attached to the existing dock to consolidate the shoreline development and enhance the shoreline buffer, and to avoid the addition of a second structure projecting further than 15 meters into the lake. The application was circulated in accordance with the Planning Act and to the Penn Lake Association. These comments were provided to council. The Lake Association noted concerns and requested deferral until the appropriate information was provided. 3 letters of objection were also provided, which echoed this sentiment. In view of the foregoing, staff are not did not make a recommendation until such time this additional information is provided, including an amended fish habitat assessment with the revegetation plan, as well as justification for the increased projection of the dock and boathouse. Planning Council could decide to refuse, approve, or provisionally approve the application. However, it's not recommended, as further review of the application would be appropriate once these details are provided. Should Planning Council view the application favorably, an option has been provided for a provisional approval. Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kelsey. Before I go to the applicant, can I ask you to reiterate for council and everyone watching what the Penn Lake Association letter said? Because we do weigh Lake Association's word very heavily.
Thank you very much, Chair Stone. Essentially, the Penn Lake letter concurred and reviewed our CPP policies and concurred with a lot of what the staff report had said, looking at what's more appropriate for this lot and further information being provided. So they asked for a recommended deferral or refusal of the application.
Thanks very much. Okay, so I will go to the applicant or their representative to make any comments. Come on down. Almost. There you go.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. My name's Eric McPherson. I reside at 10 Orr Road, Utterson, Ontario is our shop. And Chair, through you, I would like to address a couple of items regarding the several letters of objection that have been submitted regarding our application. The first being that we have had this application in the works since this time last year. We have hired an independent contractor, Riverstone Environmental Solutions Incorporated, to complete a fish habitat study for the subject property. That included a site visit on June 30th of 2022, and this is an excerpt from that report regarding the location of the proposed boathouse. The western portion of the lake shoreline is also natural with a moderately dense riparian canopy. Nearshore slopes are shallow, which carries into the water, where 1 meter depth is found approximately noted 7 meters from shore. Substrates are entirely sand well into the lake. No large cover features were noted, such as boulders or fallen trees. Aquatic vegetation is entirely absent on the subject property and adjacent lands. References a photograph. The historical classification of type 1 fish habitat through the NDMNFR was based on the presence of dense beds of aquatic vegetation. These beds are no longer present. Based on the conditions and characteristics described above, Riverstone would classify the shoreline as type 2 important fish habitat along the western shoreline, providing general feeding and movement habitat for a variety of species that occur in Peninsula Lake, including smallmouth bass and a variety of cyprinids and other fish species. The area fronting the eastern portion of the property at the confluence of the lake and watercourse is considered type 1, critical fish habitat. These areas are constantly classified in this manner as they provide unique environments for fish that are rare on the landscape and function critically for fish. So that's the end of the expert from Riverstone. So this would indicate that the proposed location of the boathouse on the western side of the property is the least invasive from a fisheries standpoint. I would also like to note that the boathouse complies with the side yard setback and is angled towards the middle of the property, which should help limit the effects on the views from the neighboring properties. Again, this location complies with the requirements set out in the CPP, including its square footage, as we are still well under the allowable accessory buildings lot coverage. A further note, one of the letters references a higher level of silts, etc., in front of their property, and a change in water depth. I believe this may have occurred more so from a road washout that happened about 4 years ago, which was certainly not the property owner's doing. That is also one of the reasons we would not have been able to use the existing footprint of the boathouse. The water depth in that area is no longer viable, as the boathouse would have to extend nearly 100 feet out from the shoreline to be of any use. I would also like to make note on the amended area width of 46.84 meters as referenced in our application. I feel like this might be a little bit misleading, as this is the distance from our 15-meter amenity area over to the shed, and now we've included the boathouse in that calculation as well. So we're really looking to maintain a 15-meter amenity area and then two 2-meter pathways to the shed and the boathouse. And we're happy to do any remedial planting as recommended by Riverstone and the town. Yeah, and just to clarify, dryland boathouse, I find that that's a little bit misleading because this is a garden shed. I totally agree that that's the definition of the bylaw, but again, it's under 10 by 10, so it's not a dryland boathouse per se, because you can't store a boat in it. But anyways, that's just my personal little note. Yeah, and again, sorry, I've lost track of my speech here. At this point, the area surrounding the shed is well vegetated with several white pines and white birch. And in the summer months, I doubt you would even be able to see it from the lake. Again, it was not referenced in the fish habitat study that was completed. I think that's due to its size and the vegetation already surrounding it. I have been in contact with Riverstone on that, and he was happy to revise to include some notes on that, but just wasn't able to do that before our meeting today. So in conclusion, I believe that our application complies with the spirit of the CPP, and I hope you agree. I appreciate everyone's time in this application, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. All right. This isn't a public meeting, but we do have some deputations that were applied for. So at this point, I will ask Paul Eklund and Jane Woodcock to speak. Can we get another chair for Jane? If you can move that microphone right up to you, and you've got 10 minutes. Help
Okay.
yourself.
Chair Stone, Madam Mayor, councilors, planning department, staff members, thank you for inviting me to speak to pose concerning planning application CPP/11/2003/HTE. I would also like to initially take this opportunity to thank all of you for your tireless and often unrecognized work that each of you do on a daily basis to administer and improve the quality of life of the citizens of Huntsville. I've taken this day off work on short notice due to the importance of deputizing or deposing on the objection to this application secondary to the very serious nature of the changes that are requested. As a physician, I've only ever rescheduled a complete day of patients due to serious illness of myself or family members. This is also the first in-person public gathering, although I practice daily, that I've attended in 3 years. That's how serious I believe this objection to this application is. As a citizen, I think it's important for individuals to consider sober second thought about the impact of this decision would have on precedent of shoreline and land development of Peninsula Lake and Muskoka Lakes. We share Peninsula Lakes, and I mean share, majestic beauty for 4 seasons, and this is significant. During our busy lives, we often take these amazing surroundings for granted. I came to Huntsville as a 6-month-old child, and I've had the honor and distinct privilege of enjoying Penn Lake with relatively undisturbed shorelines, although some development, since that time. I live and practice medicine in Burlington, Ontario, so I understand the impact that high-density living has on people, including the effects of overdeveloped green space. When Mr. Fitter came to purchase the property at 781 Canal Road, both myself and Ms. Woodcock welcomed he and his wife to the Cove and asked that he be careful in the development of the house that he was planning and maintain the relative footprint as well as the land and shoreline that he will be fortunate to utilize. At that time, I was a single caregiver to my palliative mother as well as practicing medicine. I did not attend the planning meetings such as this one to understand the scope of the proposed development. I feel guilty, as Ms. Woodcock will later state, of not taking personal responsibility and not fulfilling my conservator responsibilities at that time. I trusted Mr. Fitter to be a responsible, civic-minded contractor who had set an example how environmentally responsible development should be conducted. That trust was misplaced. Can you put number 1, clerk, put number 1 picture up? Fitter 1. See overhead drone.
The one you submitted to us?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
As you can see in the pictures from the aerial,
We don't see it.
do you see it?
Yep, good.
Okay. As you can see in the pictures projected from aerial, this property is heavily developed with complete loss of natural native shoreline. You can see all the large boulders, not natural pebbled or lake stone. With exception of the small now threatened areas adjoining the property's east and west property lines. The dramatic changes from This is dramatic from the changes you can see on the 2013 Penn Lake movie that was circulated to all members here. And even for me, it was shocking, the differences between 2013 and today, as what you see on the, and can you just bring the other one up? No, just scroll up. That's it. If you look, we'll scroll down just one more. Sorry. No, this, up. Yeah. If you look at this blue lily pad floating at the top left, this is approximately projected where Mr. Fitter proposes to place his new boathouse and dock. The lily pad projects right in front of the 747 Canal dock, and you can notice the result of the development. Also, you can see that massive silt filtration, and I take disagreement with this just because of one road collapse or washout. This has increased dramatically in the last 6 years, and so much so it's up to your ankles in muck, and also a lot of weeding. So this, this information. This is from the hills of above Canal Road funneled through this area. Can you put cold water picture? Just put that full. And just scroll up slowly. Another picture is the man-made changes to the meandering creek bed that feeds Peninsula Lake, which is partially denuded now, altered bank, valley, an asphalt bridge, poly pipes with effluent filters that protrude into it, electrical and water conduits placed under it, beside which Mr. Fitter is permitted to park his RV that he uses as additional living space. The concern about future fish habitat is paramount. As you notice from the shoreline picture, can you fit it too? And then scroll up one. That's it. The property has been altered permanently unless it is reclaimed. In discussions with the District of Muskoka's chief planner, the entire shore of MNR mapped is type 1 fish habitat, which is documented. The request for development bases losses of 30 meters and additional 1.5 meters of fish 1 habitat. Both the Penn Lake Association environmental designate and the district planner agreed that, stating that there was an advantage of relocating, in quotation marks, a boathouse that no longer exists, secondary to a single justifying report by the consultant biologist, was questionable and could be peer-reviewed if that was reasonable. Given the visible damage already done to the shoreline that goes right up the creek, as you can see. How has this affected me? Diving into Penn Lake, first swim in the spring, and tasting silt instead of tasting that really nice taste of Penn Lake. Walking silted lake bottom, the future inability to swim, boat, or fish close to the shoreline, and the obstructed views that will occur of the lake, of the surrounding properties. The questions I would ask today to Council, Mayor, and Chair Stone is, how much is too much? Do we really want to live on the land and water versus with the land and water? What is the precedent that we'll be setting for the future of Peninsula Lake and Muskoka Lakes? In conclusion, I would like to thank Chair Stone, Madam Mayor, councilors, and staff for the opportunity to speak. I would like to have the council have sober second thought about the development of proposed in this application, either deny or defer the decision based on the current evidence presented. I would also like to ask council to consider the significant ramifications that this precedent development will have on future developments and future generations to enjoy what we often take too much for granted. Thank you.
Thanks very much. All right. So we don't have much time left for another deputation. There was just one deputation asked for.
I signed two.
Yeah,
I signed one and submitted it with my letter.
I signed 2 people on.
All right. If you could make it as quick as possible, that would be great. But go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Jane Woodcock. My name is Jane Woodcock. Coming into this 3rd floor brought back a lot of memories for me. My grandparents, the Woodcocks, were the caretakers of this municipal building for years when I was growing up. I should correct the dates in the 2nd paragraph of my letter of opposition to the late fall of 2015, I think. I feel that I have only been able to react and not be proactive in keeping the natural heritage and shoreline of our bay. As a young person, I was heavily involved in the stewardship of the lake, from loon surveys to depth measurements of water clarity and water quality. I know Mr. Fitter had at least 2 separate stop work orders. After speaking with MNR and F person presenting at the Penn Lake Association Environmental Workshop I was attending, he spoke with me and answered questions, and then said that Mr. Fitter was in litigation with them and he didn't want to say much more to me. So if MNR and F have already worked with Mr. Fitter on the property, and actually made a plan together for their water diversion around all his structures. I think they need to revisit this plan because it isn't working. You see in the submitted photos the plume from the cold water stream after it rains. Why do you want to reduce the setback to type 1 fish habitat from 30 meters or 98 feet to 0? When Mr. Fitter's shoreline and the bay have already been significantly altered. Some of those measurements need to be clarified. It was really hard to interpret it as a layperson, and we tried to hire 11, we approached 11 planners to try to hire some professional advice and weren't able to. To add another 78-foot new dock to attach a double slip boathouse located right out in front of our dock at the 747 property, the west side of Mr. Fitter's property, seems totally inappropriate. Also, to put in a 6-foot wide pathway down to it. How much more development can an 85.7 meter wide property piece of shoreline sustain? In some townships, or maybe it's called wards, I don't know, I'm a lay person, that would have been considered WR1 because the 62 to 120 meters would fit that property, but somehow it's being, it's grandfathered, or it's called WR2 and now shoreline, I'm not sure which, anyhow. The old single slip boathouse that was Mr. Josky's was one of the first things Mr. Fitter took out. The whole footprint of the single slip boathouse was gone. So when I was trying to look at the map with a magnifying glass and saw relocation of boathouse, I don't know how you relocate something that isn't there. As far as adding increased area to the shore locker, and when I was reading the staff report, the non-complying dry boathouse, you can see in the picture that it already has electricity to it, and I believe water. Asking to forgive a setback to the cold water stream. What about the lake? It's right at the edge of the lake. On the other side of the cold water stream, a short distance upstream, there's an RV park there that has water and electricity going to it that goes underneath the stream to get to it. I'm probably repeating myself, but looking at the overhead drone shot clearly shows how much of the property is already developed, either paved or hardscaped or softscaped. I think for you, the Fitter One picture showed that. I truly believe that this development is not in keeping with the natural heritage of the lake, setting a brand new precedent of a new increased slip to double slip boathouse 80 some odd feet out from the shore is not what I think fits the natural shoreline. And you're right across from Deerhurst. I'd really like to thank the council and Madam Mayor for having this opportunity to speak.
All right. Thank you very much to you both.
You need to sign this.
That's all right. We already have your information.
Oh.
Yeah. Thanks very much. If you guys just sit back in the gallery, and I'm going to go to council for any comments or questions about this application. It is before us for information only at this point. Comments or questions? Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I can go first. I certainly agree with staff's recommendation that this report needs to be deferred. I mean, at the very least. I think there are a number of outstanding questions that staff have rightly pointed out. I do have a couple of questions, though, with respect to the necessity of increasing the amenity area from 15 meters to 46.84. I heard the applicant make reference to that, and I wasn't actually quite sure what the rationale was. You made reference to the measurement of the walkways, or somehow that was included, and yet, from my perspective, that still is a huge increase from 15 meters to 46.84. So that for me is something that I need to understand a lot more to figure out, because the pictures depict actually an entire shoreline that is manicured as opposed to in a natural state. So, and the second part that's kind of related to that, if that's okay, Chair Stone.
Sure.
Is there's reference to what would be, at the end of this phase of development, a natural state, and yet the development that's occurred to date is really contrary to that. It's a manicured lawn with rock face and is the opposite. So I guess I'd be asking the applicant again how they would plan to do it differently from what has been done to date. And then the last question that I would have would be about the necessity of building a new boathouse in a new area rather than using the existing, where there's an existing dock, and rather than having both different amenity spaces. I don't understand the rationale for that as well.
Okay.
So those are three significant things for me.
Thanks. Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and through you. I guess what I'm most troubled by is this is a cove/bay type area. It's not a straight line waterfront development. And I think going out, it's a 50% or more increase on how far you'll be going out. And I guess, for lack of a better word, might stick out like a sore thumb. I don't see the need to go out that far when if you're on the other docks or even on the other side, you're going to be looking right at this boathouse. So I'm wondering why it has to be out that far. I know that there's a benefit of being in type 2 instead of type 1, but perhaps it's not suitable in that area at all. I don't know. Just my thoughts.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Deputy Mayor Armour.
Thanks very much. I'm curious, what is the depth at the end of the current dock?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair, we don't know. If you're able to show the screen for our staff, it does show that there's the depth. This line here is the 2.75 contour, and you can see it going here as my mouse goes. But at this very far point of the dock, we don't know the depth there, but we know here is 0.85 meters and 2.75 feet. So that's one of the things that we wanted further clarification on.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. The shoreline development with all those stones, is that something that would have been done with a permit? Is that something that we would approve? Just out of curiosity.
Thank you for the question, through you, Chair Stone. So those stones would be considered within the amenity area. So in the last site plan, I don't believe those were shown. So we look at in the amenity area, any hardscaping, any huge boulders, those are all considered in the amenity area. So of that previous approval, those weren't shown, and that's what I could say for that.
All right. I have a couple comments. So I do question whether the extension of the dock and boathouse has been necessitated by the applicant dumping sand to create an illegal beach right at the shoreline, as well as having the manicured lawn right down to the shoreline. Before I would be comfortable with seeing this again, I would like to see the dock and the boathouse attached together, only one path to the water, the amenity area being no greater than 25%, and significantly revegetate 30 meters from the shoreline. This manicured lawn down to the water is a perfect example of bad stewardship of our lands. So with that, We don't have a resolution on this. Are there any more comments or questions before we move on? Deputy Mayor Armour.
Thanks, Chair. So through you, I'd also like to see a rendition of what the boathouse would, if it comes back with the boathouse, where they're proposing it and where the boathouse would be if it was on the current dock, just so we can actually see how it would look. That would be very helpful, for sure. And how it affects the neighbors' sight lines.
All right. So we have no resolution on this. So, moved by Deputy Mayor Armour, seconded by Councillor Renwick, be resolved that confirmation bylaw 2023-24 be received, numbered, and read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed this 15th day of March 2023. All in favor? And that's carried. Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Schumacher. Be it resolved that we do now hereby adjourn at 2:45 p.m. All in favor? And that's carried.